Welcome to Tough Talk. I'm your host, Paul Taros, and today my guest is Brad Host. Brad has been a resident of Birmingham and active in community affairs for over 40 years. He has served 2 terms on the Birmingham School Board and has been involved in 2 neighborhood associations. Over the last 15 years, he has been active in rezoning issues and fought the library bond proposal in 2015. He is currently fighting the $57.4 million bond issue for a new parking garage that will take place this August 6th. Brad is also running for Birmingham City Commission this November 5th. Welcome, Brad.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So, what is this $57 million bond issue for a parking garage all about?
Well, the city would say that they need to move the structure and then, of course, demo it first and then move it 71 feet, put 3 additional floors underground and 1 on above the 5 stories that we know as the now structure. And then, of course, they want to build the RH, the developers want to build RH on that 71 feet. And then the second phase is 135,000 square feet commercial retail development, all of which is on public land that would be leased to the developer. That's their version.
Okay. When you say RH, that's...
Restoration Hardware.
Okay.
I think they just changed their name, to RH.
Oh, okay. And they're currently in Somerset?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So why do the residents have to vote on this proposal?
Well, first off, it's a special election to vote on it because the city has said that the structure is unsafe. They've changed that tune, by the way, as well as they keep changing, what they are going to develop. But we try to keep on top of the numbers and what the city is giving us so that we can react to it with facts.
Okay.
One of the biggest problems, Paul, is that we have a 275 parking spot deficit in that structure right now. And this new and improved structure, which, by the way, to take the 3 floors down into the ground and add 1 on top, doubles the price of the structure compared to other ones in our area. But the addition of 414 spots, that's what they're adding. The real rube is that the RFP, which was for the entire development, which we'll call 133 million, used 564 square feet per parking spot in the RFP. And when they ratcheted it back down to the parking structure and the RH center, they stayed with that 564 square feet, whereas if you use 300, which is the norm in Birmingham for commercial space, there's 4 floors at 300 square feet per spot, and then the rooftop, which is going to be a restaurant, would be 100 square feet per car, which more or less adds up to about 300 of the 400 spots they're talking about, whereas the city is stuck with their 564 square feet on the RH building, which is unfortunate.
Okay. So I think what you're saying is we're not gaining that many parking spaces.
Well, I'm trying to show you holes in their argument for trying to get us out of this deficit condition. And of course, they have changed their tune on the unsafe nature of the existing structure, because they finally released July 5th the engineering study on the structure, which says that the structure is sound. All it needs is a couple million in fascia and maybe 4 million interior, and that structure can go on for decades.
So 6 or 7 million, and the structure will look good and function properly.
Yes, sir, as well as go on for decades. The notion is a lot of us in Birmingham live in very old homes, and if we maintain them, they'll go on for another 100 years. You're talking to me in a 100-year-old house as it is, but it's built like the Rock of Gibraltar, and that's more or less how I would view the now structure that we're talking about. I mean, it's in place concrete that should last. Look at the Roman Colosseum.
Well, I'm right there with you. My house is 90 years old, and it's sound. So structure is well built. Will continue for many years. So they say parking fees will pay to cover the debt. What happens if the fees don't cover the debt payments?
Well, you bring up a very basic point, and that is if you look at the language on the special election, it's a general obligation bond, which by definition, Paul, means you and I and everybody else in Birmingham is obligated for it. I've lost my train of thought on that. It says is in part the obligation for the parking structure. The words "in part of" are very worrisome, and then the money that you were mentioning toward the end of the paragraph, it says the revenues from the parking structure are intended to pay for it. The notion is we've had people work on the numbers that the city has given us, and unless they dramatically raise parking rates, there's no way the structure can be self-sustaining on the payment. But again, I come back to the fact that the whole thing, the taxpayers of Birmingham are responsible for. Whenever they tell you something's free, I like to think most of us are mature enough to step back and say, no, I don't think so. There's nothing's free.
You're right there. So you talked earlier about the RFP. How did the contract get awarded to the current developer?
Well, my version would be different than the city's, and the fact is the RFP was so gigantic, and the city even says it was so gigantic that there were very few qualified bidders to begin with, and I assume they mean in the Midwest. They only had 4 bidders, and 2 dropped out right away, and you're probably aware the second one is suing the city in federal court. They gave it to the remaining bidder, and they've divided this up into 3 components. One component is the city, and Paul, that would be you and I. Another component is the developers, and they are, well known. And the third component is the design build team, and they show this right up to the minute. Now, what's weird about this relationship is that 2 of the developers are the design build team. So the 2 different groups are more or less one and the same. And the developers are getting a fee to supervise the design build, which happens to be themselves. And according to the city, that's not uncommon that developers will choose their own companies to work with. What I personally feel is out of whack is that they get $1.7 million to supervise themselves. I think that even though it's not against the law, I think there should be more arm's length agreement that we're signing.
I agree with you. I mean, you would think they're thinking they're doing it properly, and there should be somebody independent just looking over their shoulder.
Right. In this case, I don't know how they can look over their own shoulder, but they're sure going to get a lot of money to try.
Right. So, like you, I live in Birmingham, and I get mailers almost every other day saying to vote yes. This is just a few of the mailers I've received. And every time I log on to Facebook, and I'm not exaggerating, I see an ad telling me to vote yes for this proposal. Do you have any idea how much the developer has spent trying to sell this deal to the taxpayers of Birmingham?
Well, we have talked to a few people that supposedly know what things cost, and the bill that we're up against is a minimum of $200,000, namely out of Okemos and all the political operatives are having. We're up against some very serious money, whereas for my PAC and the people that are trying to fight this, we're getting $25 to $100 donations from our neighbors. You know, the political operatives tend to not be Birmingham residents. You know, you may not know this, but they have hired people to go door to door, and I would say they are not from Birmingham, but they're being paid to tap on doors and get the yes vote out.
Okay.
Whereas our group are all just Birmingham citizens who love this town and don't want us to get in a situation where we're have the biggest mortgage in the history of our city without any kind of guarantees.
Okay. Also, I received, and I'm sure you did, this nice piece of information from the city of Birmingham.
6 pages. Nice.
And it seems like everything you're saying, you know, your group is saying, is labeled a myth, and then they supposedly say this is the actual fact. How would you respond to this?
Well, I guess we should be delighted that they took our materials seriously, but we don't feel they're myths at all. In fact, the main myth that really is bothersome to me is the fact that they came out with the engineering study July 5th, which says the structure is sound. And whereas before that, they were saying that it was unsafe. You know, the notion is we're only trying to deal in facts, and to call citizens who are concerned and involved and watching all this myth makers, no, we're playing off of their facts. And I assume you know we filed a grievance with Jocelyn Benson as Secretary of State for a campaign finance violation because you know, the thing all but says, yes, you got to vote for it. And sadly, it was knocked down, but that was probably the point we realized that it was hardball. Another problem is there's a lot of those 6-pagers floating around, and they're in the hands of the hired yes people, and I wonder how they got there.
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't believe that, you know, everything they have it, you know, targeted towards your group, that everything you guys are saying is a myth and nothing the developers are saying is a myth. And that just seems impossible.
I would agree with you, Paul. I mean, we are committed to the betterment of our city, and maybe part of this proposal is excellent, but overall it is dysfunctional and putting the taxpayers on the hook for something that is basically a promise, and you don't risk all your marbles on a promise.
Okay. And, and so if by chance this bond proposal passes, will voters have any say about the other development that will take place?
They have already said no. The point being, if we pass this, phase two will be an automatic. And we haven't even really broached one of the main bones of contention, which is this is the most prime land that you and I own that has not been developed. And to do an end run around the voters on the biggest undeveloped piece of land in our repertoire, the way they do it is with a 99-year lease, because if it were 100 years, it's the same as the sale, and by law, if it's a sale, they have to ask the voters of Birmingham to approve it, and they don't want to do that. That's why there's a special election.
Well, and it clearly seems to be an end run around the voters with a 99-year lease.
Yes, sir. And well, first off, the developers are paying for the lease. I mean, for the special election, and our city attorney says that's okay. It's like giving a park bench to one of our parks. Only in this case, it happens to be a $20,000 donation to cover this.
Repeat that. We lost you there.
Okay, the special election is being backed by the developers and paid for, and it's considered a donation to the city of Birmingham. Our attorney, Tim Currier, the city attorney, has said that that is legal because it's like just a donation to help us with art in the park or a bench by a lake. It's a donation to the city. The fact that it happens to be about the same amount as the special election is probably just a coincidence.
I'm sure it was just a coincidence. And, I find it kind of suspicious when they schedule these large bond issues not in November, but rather in August when voter turnout is usually lighter.
Yes, and I would say that would be the first suspicious thing about this.
Wow.
It really isn't fair to the voters. It, in a very real sense, it's reminiscent of our library bond in 2015. There was no reason to have a special election. The library wasn't going to fall down. This parking structure is not going to fall down. It's in pretty good shape, though it's been neglected, and that should be part of our city's obligation to upkeep our assets. They've neglected it here in the last 10 years, and as such, maybe they were preparing for the demolition as of August 6th, the election.
Okay.
Maybe that's their excuse, but I don't think that's right.
Okay. Now, to me, one of the really suspicious things or troublesome things, maybe I should say, is one of the individuals involved in the development group is Ron Bogie, who a few years back sold the first 7 floors of the Capitol View building to the state of Michigan for about $41 million. The assessor valued that deal at maybe $12 million, said you could build that structure new for $22 million. So anyway you slice it, he made out pretty well in that deal.
Well,
And to enter into a deal with somebody who does deals like that, I think Birmingham residents should be concerned.
Paul, without getting into personalities, we totally agree with you. We suggest people look up Mr. Boji and the various stories that journalists, real journalists, have done in depth on the many private-public partnerships he has facilitated. It's very worrisome.
Okay. And are there any other things that are troubling to you regarding this deal?
Well, the fact that, this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but the fact that all the information disseminated by the city as well as by the developers attempts to discredit what our side would say are truly the facts. They're not myths. That's unsettling, but I had a very smart person tell me this morning, Brad, this is a political campaign. Don't take anything personally, which is my lead into what happened 2 weeks ago, this past Monday night, when two of my cohorts, David Bloom and Clinton Baller, were not allowed to speak in the open session at the end of the city commission meeting. Literally there were 5 or 6 of us there to speak about this parking structure as well as the bond issue, and they shut us down with a very flimsy excuse that the cable agreement with the cable authority didn't allow political speech. And maybe you know that there's a lawsuit about the First Amendment against the city, and which they doubled down on 2 nights ago by saying that they can stop the TV cameras and the mics anytime they want. They never articulated why or when they would do that, and they left the mics on all night. But the fact that they can turn them off and not have to listen to citizens talking to them about serious local issues, and they can do it arbitrarily, is another form of censorship. So the suit with the First and the 14th Amendment may be expanded thanks to their actions Monday evening with us. They don't like us, Paul.
Well, they don't like me either. That's why I was kicked off of their the Bloomfield Township Television network after doing my show for 2 years. So you're not alone there, Brad.
Okay. Well, there's joy in being an outsider, I guess. So maybe you don't know this. Clinton, Baller, and I are running for the commission. And the point being, we'd like to become part of the solution. Personally, I think we can help make Birmingham better, but we have to be more collaborative and include everybody. The city would say, well, we had 40 meetings in the last year and a half on this, and very few people said anything. Whereas if you were a Birmingham resident that didn't know anything about this, I would put it this way. Well, the commission and the administration started talking about the now structure a year and a half ago. They took their discussion instantly to Mars or Pluto or Jupiter, and they stayed there for a year and a half. And then with 20 minutes before the vote, May 6th, the mayor ratcheted it back down to the parking structure. Well, we spent a year and a half almost in a black hole, and it's very hard to believe that that year and a half was not part of the whole scheme. And that would be, the RH building and phase 2, adding 130,000 square feet of commercial retail. Point is, the most important thing they have should be public trust, and they don't have it with a lot of us. Namely, they have not shown themselves to be trustworthy.
Well, I wish you and Clinton much success come November, and I hope your group is successful in defeating this bond proposal.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. That's nice to hear.
Okay, well, thank you, Brad.
My pleasure. Appreciate it, Paul.